What is up, everybody? Welcome back to my continued trek through Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation, now at Volume 2, Chapter 7 and onward. Yes, like I said before, 6 took a bit of time to get through an entire video just on Chapter 6, but hopefully going forward, we can start speeding things up. But yeah, let's just jump right into it. Kicking things off in Chapter 7, we start to get a little bit of insight into what Rudeus has been doing recently. He has learned Beast, Demon, and Fighting God tongues. He does note there's no literature out there for Sky God and Sea God specifically, nor does anybody really use those languages. I mean, for Sky God, you're going to have to seek out people, Sky God, probably up in the mountains or something like that, and obviously Sea God stuff. It's just the sea folk. He is approaching intermediate sword play, but he does note that Eris is pretty much already in advance. There's a huge gap being created between the two of them. As for his magic, he's kind of settled on the idea that he's just going to wait until he gets to the Magic Academy, because all he's really doing right now is just creating figures and, practicing creating and molding figures. I think we've noted by this point several times that he's sort of at a slump. He's not really advancing anymore. Again, attributing a lot of this to the idea that most of his knowledge, most of his skill in magic has kind of been just because he knows about science. He knows how to do incantation lists. That's what makes him special, but he's not really advancing. It's not as if he's a prodigy that's learning new magic and creating crazy stuff. This is where we start to get into Rudeus' birthday. It's obviously the Grey Rat family wants to do something really special for him, specifically Eris. Eris is kind of sneaking around and trying to set up everything perfectly for him, and yes, Rudeus takes notes of it. But this is great because when we get to the point where Ghislaine is purposely stalling Rudeus because they're setting up everything, and he knows this, and so he starts to pick at Ghislaine. I don't recall too much about this scene, but I do specifically remember that he does the whole thing where he talks about the figure, and he's making a figure for Ghislaine, but he doesn't know how the tail attaches, so he tricks her into allowing him to see her butt. But what was cool, and I don't remember this in the anime, is they actually get Ghislaine's trying to sway his conversation. Like, oh, hey, show me something great. Show me some great magic. Show me saint-level magic. And he's like, he plays into it. So he's talking about like, oh yeah, I could do that for you. I have this great spell that creates this huge monsoon with gale force winds and will flood the city and everything. And she's like, I can try it. And she's like, no, wait, no, you don't have to do that. He's like, oh, okay, well, let's just go outside town. I'll show you there. We'll go out of town and I'll show you the spell there. She's like, no, it's too late in the day. We can't do that. And he's like, you'll protect us. Like, it continues to kind of just pull her along. But yeah, that's where it gets into him actually talking about the tail connection. He actually gets into how he's been beaten as a man by masculinity of Ghislaine. And this is where we get into the actual party itself, which again plays kind of similarly. The interesting thing is I don't really recall him talking about faking his tears using water magic. And he's done this several times throughout the novel. And like I said, I don't remember that being in the anime. But yeah, whenever he's sulking or whatever, it always seemed like it was just him kind of covering his face and hoping that people think that he's crying. But he was actually using water magic to create tears, which is really hilarious. And gets into a funny discussion later on with Philip. And yeah, similar to the anime, pretty much wars start to be created. Saro says that he wants to, prop him up and go take down and go take over the Natos family. But obviously they're not for this. They kind of start dropping names that I don't recall being in the anime. They did technically get into specifically everything surrounding Philip and his wage to take over the family. And we'll get into that in a minute. But before that, we have Eris come forward and say, I have a surprise for you. And yeah, he technically says, oh, you brought my family here? And she's like, oh, no, that's not what I meant. And he starts to think that he may have overdone it because everybody's just absolutely crushed. But no, she snaps her finger, fails to snap her finger, calls forth Alphonse, and Alphonse has the staff that is the gift to him. And this gets into a lot more detail about this staff specifically. And I mean, typically it's like, oh, here's the staff. It looks gorgeous. It's obviously really expensive. But this really gets into the different types of wood used for the staff and the different types of crystals at its head that basically both tell how powerful it is, what its aptitude is, and essentially the cost of it, and how much it amplifies the magic itself. He states that this one is made of gnarled, knobby wood. At the tip is a large, costly-looking magical crystal. He notes that the rank of the staff is determined by the wood and the stone. Each type of magic had a certain affinity with different types of wood. He notes specifically that fire and earth with persimmon, water and wind match to pagoda. But then he kind of gets specifically into the crystal itself, that is actually technically the most important thing, because you can kind of intermix. But he says there's many grades of crystal, but larger and more transparent is the more effective at channeling, and thus increasing the potency of the magic itself. He did note that he got those 2 wands that he created before, so he kind of gets an idea of how much this stuff costs, but this thing at the head of it is the size of his fist. He said this thing could easily be worth over 100 gold. This is where Alphonse explains the staff itself and its creation. He said the wood for this cane came from the branch of a living elder treant in the eastern part of the Great Forest of Millis Continent. It is said that the elder treant is a higher subspecies of a lesser treant, born from the nourishment of a fair spring. It's an A-rank magical creature that can manipulate water magic. The crystal comes from the northern part of there's that name again. Begaret continent, from a wayward sea dragon, another rank A item. And then he notes the crafter itself, which is the greatest staff craftsman and rod director in the Azeron Royal Palace Mage Guild. So, again, this thing is super rare and super expensive. And we'll get into this in a little bit when we talk about the whole scene of Eris and Rudy in the bedroom. It's this idea of really getting how much Eris cares for Rudeus. And he notes the idea of, I'm getting into it. I've taken advantage of this girl that all she wants to do is do something for me, and I just squander it. He's realizing, yes, this is technically probably Cyrus's money. Yes, this is Philip's money. This is their family's money. But make no mistake, she put this together. She put the party together, and she made sure that she got the best thing she can think of that Rudeus would need. Staff. Just like Roxy said, you can tell a mage by their staff. And yes, it draws a lot of attention. It's a status symbol. To carry this thing, and that's why he always covers it. It's literally like a big beacon that comes still this. This is a status symbol, and this is extremely rare and extremely expensive, which, yes, technically later on in the anime gets into the idea of, what if he sold it? Like, it means a lot to him, and it would hurt the idea that he would sell that thing. And yes, we get the title Aqua Heartia, Arrogant Water Dragon King, which I do like the idea that he notes that it's like some super cheesy, chuny thing. This is where we get an actual full insight into the War of the Family. Essentially, the failure of Philip to take over the house. Now, and the name of the family. Now, we kind of noted this a little bit in the idea that he thought that Hilda hated him. Philip goes and talks about how the only reason that she kind of looked at you with disdain is that all of her boys are taken away. And now we have somebody of the Grey Rat family just running around the house like he owns it. She was angry. She was jealous. And that's when we start to get into the whole concept of what Philip has gone through. And yes, technically wanting to put Rudeus at the head so that he can take over the family. And in a sense, get his boys back and remove this pain from Hilda. He talks about the fact that, yes, technically Eris has a younger and older brother, but they're both taken away to the capital by his brother. This all stems from a battle for the head of the family. And obviously, if one wins, which is a tradition apparently, and that he accepts it, that he failed, and it would be the equal the other way around. If his brother would have failed, he would be taking in his sons. But there was 3 brothers, Philip, Gordon, and James. Yes, Philip is the father of Eris. He talks about the battle for the head of the family, and that in the first half of this struggle, James secretly pulled Gordon into a secret relationship with one of the daughters of the Eros Grey Rat family. And he worked behind the scenes to kind of bring them together and hide their identity to the point where they would become romantic, and thus be married into the Eros Brant's family. So he basically got rid of Gordon. Like, that easy. He went, hey, check out this girl. Isn't she hot? All right, yeah, you two get married off. Oh, that takes care of him. Like, secretly just kind of pulling strings. Like, obviously, I would think that between the two of them, that wasn't much of a loss because they found love. But it does take him out of the running. So this obviously leaves Philip versus James. And he doesn't act as if there's some big, huge struggle or some big war that happens. Philip just lost. He knows that James was technically 6 years older than him, had much more pullings. He was much more well known. He had more political standing. He had a lot more social standing. He had more money. And obviously the one big key thing here being connections and political power. And that was enough. He just lost. There was no war or anything. But following this whole discussion, he starts to get into talking about the future of Eris. Like we all know, this is the point in which Philip is basically saying, hey, I'll tie her up and stick her in the bed for you. I mean, you're free. You're free to have her. You just marry her, and again, we'll use you and take over the family. But yeah, Rudeus doesn't want this. He's like, no, I don't want to have nothing to do with some political power struggle that's happening here. But he does note the idea that when Eris was born, she was such a tomboy. He always he lost hope in her. He really did. And I think it is important here to note the idea that yes, if he were to marry her off to somebody, she'd probably just come back. Like she'd probably just punch the dude that she gets married to and just come right back. So it does kind of acknowledge this point that Eris has changed. He does note that if anybody, you're kind of perfect for her. Like, you're the only one that could tame this beast. And honestly, before Rudeus came around, he hired Ghislaine because he was just hoping that she would just become an adventurer. Like, he knew that he could never marry her off, so might as well just bring in Ghislaine, hope that she's good enough, and then become an adventurer, and that would be her life. Just give her something. I do like that in the mix of all this, when he's talking about the Rudeus showing up and changing Eris, it gets in this idea that apparently, the moment that Paul got Zenith pregnant, he came, like, basically begging to Saros' family for help. Like, he needed a job, he needed a place to stay, and all this kind of stuff. And yes, technically did kind of basically shove Rudeus onto him. But yeah, this is technically the point where I mentioned earlier that Philip acknowledges that Rudeus was faking the entire. You were so good at it. You fooled Saros, you fooled Hilda, but you didn't fool me. But he acknowledges that that's kind of a skill in him. He knows the importance of money. He knows how to be diplomatic, but additionally, he knows how to put himself in harm's way to win over the people, which is technically, if you're wanting to be a politically powered person, it's actually a good thing. Like, it's as if he's noting that Rudeus would be just perfect at swaying over the hearts of the people. He'd be willing to put himself out there in harm's way, stand on the front of the battlefield, and gain the hearts of the people. But yes, this is where we get into the unfortunate scene in the bedroom, that Rudeus goes back and finds that Eris is there and completely misreads the room, which I think even as anime-only fans, we all know and felt that situation. But it did technically get into quite a bit more about Rudeus being really down on himself. Again, portrayed decently well in the anime. He does acknowledge that he's just garbage. This is why I'll always be a virgin. I don't understand the hearts of people. It does additionally get into the idea of, like, I've always played these sim games in my previous life, or these dating sim games, and I was always angry because the protagonist won't just leap into the bed or whatever. But in acknowledging the idea that, well, yeah, because those situations, you understand what the heroine's saying. You understand what the girl's saying. I can't read Eris. And I completely read her wrong. Again, acknowledging all the stuff that she did for him for this day to make him feel welcome and prop him up a little bit. And he completely squandered it. And he completely ruined the situation. And he took advantage of her. And he's realizing at that point that he is garbage. That I am a piece of crap. But additionally, it's getting a lot into really his mind running into different directions of what would happen. Like, yeah, we could have this one night stand, but I'd probably get her pregnant. I'd be forced to get married. I'd be forced to get into this whole politics of this life. And yeah, maybe if I didn't, I'd probably seek her out every night. He acknowledges this was a stupid mistake. Like, him even advancing on her was a stupid mistake. And he's acknowledging that all these repercussions that would come from it, that would essentially screw up everything he has. He says, I had no right to judge Paul. I'm a piece of crap more than him, basically. I did like the fact that he had, when he first did this, he imagined his 34-year-old self with a disgusting smile. And the moment that he said that in the book, I had a mental image of that character, which I think this is one of those things that I do like about having watched the anime first and then reading the novels. I can actually put an animated character's face to the whole situation, and it just like, ugh, yeah, ugh. It does not want to make this into a great thing at all. And yes, this follows her coming in and saying, you know, pretty much everything's okay, and I'll give me to you later on or whatever. So the promise was made. Getting into chapter 8, I finally get a Roxy perspective, and I was so happy the moment I ran into this page, because yes, I still want an Eris perspective chapter. I really do, and I was really hoping for that in Volume 2, and unfortunately did not get it. But it was really cool to at least get best girl for me, Roxy perspective in this chapter. And to set the stage, this is technically the point in which the mana is building up in the area. And this is the point in which Roxy is noting it. And unfortunately in the anime, all we did is have her look over and say, I think that might be Rudeus. I don't think it's Rudeus, but that was it. There's a lot more in this scene than just that. Yes, in this chapter, Roxy notes the mana, and she actually kind of questions, is it Rudeus that's doing it? It's obviously summoning magic. Is Rudeus learning summoning magic, basically? But this shifts quickly into Pax, the dumb prince that she is having to tutor, as he's obviously harassing her. And this was interesting because I never really had an idea of why Roxy was always getting away with this. Like, in the anime, you're seeing her set Pax on fire, and for some reason, she's not getting sent to the gallows. Like, she's not being beheaded for doing this stuff. Like, how could somebody raise their hand against a prince and survive? Well, it turns out, apparently, through this contract with this governing party, she could do whatever she wants. It was up to her and how she wanted to handle the prince. She could throw him in a cage or something just to shut him up. It knows that because she has such a high rank in this imperial court of the mage, she actually has more control and authority than even Pax, because he's just the 7th prince. His power is so low in this kingdom. Roxy is more important to this world or this kingdom than Pax, which I thought was really hilarious and completely explains why nobody would care if she set him on fire. And we technically get a hint of this when we do have Rudeus encounter Pax later on in the first season, but this really did put it into perspective exactly why she's able to do what she does. But speaking of Rudy's encounter with Pax, this is where we start to plant that seed. As we have Pax is essentially trying to threaten Roxy into allowing her to give her body to him. He's obsessed with her, and she doesn't understand this. She honestly doesn't. Roxy does not understand this. She's a demon. She's from the demon continent. She's a Midgard. Like, she shouldn't be desired by people. Yet, this guy's doing this. Why? It doesn't make any sense to her. And obviously, she shoots down the idea of him threatening her. Like, I'm gonna have you hung or something like that. And she's like, I don't care. You don't have any power. Well, you have somebody you like. You obviously have somebody you like. I'll have them found and killed. I've seen your letters. I know you're talking to somebody. I'll have him kidnapped. And she's like, go ahead. And you can't do it anyways. Like, she breaks down how this would work. So, essentially, you're going to steal a child of one of the elite royal families of the Asura Kingdom. You don't have any power to do that. You don't have any pools, any military pool to do that. We're talking about some really powerful families. When the Asura Kingdom entered battle, Notos, Eros, Zephyroth, and Boreas families were standing in the front lines. They're military men of generations. And this immediately popped in my head of, like, Soros. Like, I don't see Philip as, like, military guy, but yeah, Soros, I can see him standing in the front of the battlefield. She says that the country of Asura is 10 times the size of Sarone. If you take a child from a noble family and escort them to the gallows, you would have to possess tremendous amounts of political power and strategic skills just to pull it off. Like, he's talking about taking assassins after him. He's like, good luck, you have Ghislaine there. Sword King Ghislaine is right there. Good luck. It's just so funny, like, this back and forth of him going, well, I'll do this. And she's like, no, let's talk about this. Let me break this down for you. Like, she's not just saying, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. Like, she's literally laying it down for him that it is impossible. And this is kind of cool because it's one of those things where it's a goofy conversation, but it's also one of those things where it kind of gives you an idea of these two nations and the political pulls that each one have. And it's kind of a way of just sneaking that info dump in there that's actually entertaining, and I thought it was really fascinating stuff to get into. But yes, again, it technically explains why she's able to set him on fire and why things unfold the way they do later on when Rudeus meets this guy. But kind of following this whole conversation, she is getting into essentially some stuff about Eris and everything. Unfortunately for Pax, this is the point in which he's compared to Eris. He's 15 years old and he doesn't even know what's possible or not. Meanwhile, Eris has changed. She really does feel based on the letters that she's receiving, that this girl has changed a lot. And it is one of those moments where Roxy is acknowledging that she's kind of failing this guy. Like, over here, Rudeus has completely flipped Eris's mindset and how she handles things and her demeanor. And then over here, Pax is still the same as he was when she first entered that door, and she, again, kind of feels bad about that. But this is the point in which Roxy leaves. She has decided, I'm done, I can't do anything for this boy. And she's noting that, you know, not only is this guy a failure, but she's also knowing there's some people at this palace that don't want her there. Again, noting the idea that she is technically of a demon blood. She is a Midgard. And a little kind of quick note at the end, when she does finally leave, apparently he tried to stop her using his own personal guards. They were rebuked. And then when he called to have her captured, he was brought before the king and punished because he was unable to convince her to stay. So, again, this is all making perfect sense of how everything unfolds later on. This is when the perspective of the situation with the mana building up is shifted over to the Dragon God Orsted. This is where I get my confirmation that yes, he was indeed at the Red Worm Mountains, which was my prediction of this labyrinth. But things unfold quite different than in the anime. In the anime, he's kind of walking, he notes the mana, and then this dragon appears before him, roars at him, and then leaves. No. He's literally stepping over the body of one worm already, and it notes the idea that it looks like it was struck down by a single blow. And all the dragons around him, or the worms, are watching him, and they're afraid of him. They know that even if they were to gather together and go after Orsted, they would all die. It notes the idea that how intelligent these dragons are. They're not stupid. Technically, besides the two that end up dying, but most of the dragons are smart enough to know this guy's powerful. It knows that he is the dragon god, and that he is outside the rules of the world itself. As he's noting that the mana is pulling up and kind of questioning what would cause this madness, he's like, I'll know once I go see for myself. And that's when he steps over the corpse of this worm. Another one decides that it wants to try its luck with him, and it says that he literally becomes a clump of meat within a split second. Orsted just knocks this thing out in one shot. From there, we move to the floating fortress of the armored dragon Perugius, or Perugius. I know I'm probably saying that wrong. He notes that the light looks similar to that of the great emperor of the demon world reviving. That's when it notes specifically that a woman in a crow's mask shows up and specifies that it's actually one of the skyfolk. They're knowing that the mana level is different and that the color itself is that of a summoning. But noting that he has not seen that much light before, he kind of considers that this gotta be something different. That there's a similar amount of when the Chaos Breaker was actually created. And for those who don't know, the Chaos Breaker is the floating fortress. Inside the mind of him, it's kind of reflecting the idea that he's always been sitting there waiting for the day that he would finally be able to vanquish his loathsome enemy, which of course is Laplace. Waiting for that day that seal would be undone. Now at this point, he's assuming that possibly the Emperor is trying to unseal Laplace. Noting that the Demon Emperor has technically been quiet for about 300 years since they've been revived. But obviously seeing this as a threat, ends up summoning Bright and says essentially to search for anybody that looks suspicious and kill him. And here's an interesting part, because shifting perspectives once again, we go to the Sword Sanctum, which was again, one that was completely missing in the anime. We jumped a lot of perspectives in the anime as everybody was kind of unlooking at this gathering of mana. But there was one thing that we never got to see in the anime, and that was apparently the Sword Sanctum. We got to see Gall Falion, which is the sword god, which again, another one that I seen that and I'm like, wait. How did you miss this when you adapted the anime? Like, I've been looking forward to seeing anything on the sword god Gall Falion, and here it is. It's in the book. It's in the volume 2. But from this perspective, we get a little bit of kind of setup. He's training these two pupils. He kind of notes the two of them has kind of become a little bit overconfident ever since they reached Sword Emperor. This is a point where it kind of has this, he's poking and prodding at his two pupils. He talks about that there's no fame when it comes to the art of swordplay. Only strength. Fame only brings money and political power. But technically knows that if you have power, if you have strength, you could probably just take whoever you want. But at this point, he starts talking about Ghislaine specifically. Said that she had kind of grown soft. And that's why he believes that she kind of got stuck at Sword King. She wasn't selfish enough. Like, he believes that you have to be selfish in order to gain power and proceed any further than that. Instead, you know, in contrast to them, these two pupils that he has now have an insatiable appetite for greed and life or death battle. And this is the point when he kind of prods at his pupils. He says, defeat me in battle and then fight to the death over the title of who will be Sword God. Which is kind of, I wonder if this is a normal thing or if this is just how Gall Falion handles it, because that seems kind of wicked. When I read this part, my mind immediately went to, I wonder if this is one of those things of like, this is how he does like power leveling. So what you do is you take on two pupils, you train them endlessly until they both reach this certain level. And then in order to kind of tip the scales, one of them has to eat the experience of the other one to bump them up that little extra bit. So is that normal? Like to create a sword god that you create two of this high level, have them battle to death, and then one becomes sword god. Like, that's how he does that. And then he kind of knows the fact that once you reach that title, you can have anything. Forget about, you know, just going for fame and everything. Once you have this Sword God title, you'll have whatever you want. Again, I don't need to know that. If anybody knows, like, further on stuff, like it talks about, yeah, there's this other case where, you know, they create a sword god or a mage god or whatever by doing, I don't need to know it. I'm presenting ideas here. I think I'm going to stop there. I don't have too much left, but I think I'll have enough left here for one more video for the remaining of Volume 2. Technically, I still need to finish the extra chapter as well. We still have a perspective of Kishirika. We still have a perspective of Rudeus when this whole kind of went down. We have another little bit with Roxy, which I absolutely love that scene so much. I cannot wait to talk about the aftermath of Turning Point and Roxy going to see the aftermath and just how much more context you get in that scene. It wasn't just her walking to a billboard and, you know, two people show up randomly. It was much more than that. And additionally, we technically have the whole Forest Goddess extra chapter. So I hope you guys will join me for that video. I thank you all for watching as usual and all of your guys' support. It means so much to me. I made a post about this, but specifically, again, this was a journey down this novel series that is, yes, for me personally, very time consuming to read, take notes, put together, record, edit. The last video I did technically was an hour long of recording that I somehow managed to cut down to 20 minutes. It's a lot of effort, and to see a lot of the feedback, the positivity, everybody's support, people sharing this stuff out, just viewing it and giving me that positive feedback, it means so much to me. But I thank you guys so much, and I thank you guys for watching, and I hope you'll look forward to the next video. Additionally, if you're new here and you have not already, I hope that I've gained your support through subscribing. If you're looking for additional ways to support the channel, I would greatly appreciate if you consider supporting us through Patreon or through our tips link. There's also a super thanks button down there. I definitely appreciate everybody that does, and y'all take care.